Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Sit Down. History. It's the study of the past, but is it really? Is it also the study of something else? Is it the study of the present and the future and ourselves? What if this is the moment where you find out that I'm the stupidest guy alive, and then now we're stuck together?
That was very profound. I don't know if
Really?
you said
Thanks.
anything, but if you did, it was pretty great.
I just thought of that. I just thought of that off the top of my head. I didn't even write it or anything. We don't even have writers on the show. I do everything myself. I don't even have
Wow.
my wife helping me with the record settings, actually.
No, definitely not.
Um, yeah. Well, anyway, let me introduce our guest. So it's really it's interesting, sort of this era that we're going into where everybody's just making stuff, everybody's putting stuff out there, and people aren't hindered or hampered by any kind of standards or any kind of corporate bosses. It really is like the Wild West out here, and I think it's really cool that we can find people and connect with other people on the internet. We can have them on each other's shows. So today, our guest is a public school teacher from Texas. She has a YouTube channel, TikTok channel called Antisocial Studies. I saw one of your videos, and one of your videos came up in my, in my algorithm.
Cool.
It was with that BGC drama effect that everybody was doing.
Huh?
And you were like,
Dudes always find out I'm a history teacher and they're like, oh, I'm such a military history buff. Really? Tell me about the Battle of Lake Erie and the War of 1812. Tell me about Hung Shu Kwan and the Taiping Rebellion. You can't. It's just D-Day, isn't it?
it's always D-Day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or the Civil War?
It's yeah. There's a top three. It's like there's and I'm not talking about everyone. I'm talking about if someone identifies themselves as like a history buff, then it's either World War II, the Civil War, or Rome. It's one of those three.
Okay.
That's it.
What is your if you had to be stuck on a desert island with one of those guys,
Ooh.
which one would you pick?
Not Civil War. That's like
Really?
definitely not Civil War. Well, because I feel like people that are really obsessed with the Civil War are normally obsessed with it for strange reasons. But no, like to be clear,
We know what those reasons are, if you know what I mean.
I mean, I think we all do. But
Yeah.
I don't have an issue with any of those things. My issue is people will say like I love history, and then what they mean is like I love D-Day, and it's like then just say you love D-Day, because there's like I teach world history, so I'm like there's like an infinite number of things in history. So like just don't say you like know the whole thing if you really just have read 10 books on Gettysburg. Whatever.
Okay, but in defense of D-Day, have you ever played 2002's Medal of Honor Allied Assault?
No, and this is so many of my students, their whole knowledge of history that they try to explain to me is from video games, and I'm like, I just don't even know what to do.
Yeah. That's funny because Battlefield 1 came out a few years ago, and that was really good. And that video game was World War I. And World War I, I mean, so there's in the tutorial you play as the Harlem Hellfighters, and then there's a Gallipoli campaign. I don't play any online games. Kids today do, and I don't do it because I'm not used to playing video games on the internet. But there was a Gallipoli campaign. There's an Italian campaign.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So it kind of it made you think about World War I a lot because I've never really thought about it.
No one does.
Yeah.
They skip right to World War II. Yeah.
They go right to World War II, but I think World War I was kind of weird because it seems like, I mean, my takeaway from it is that it just seems like there were a lot of empires coming together, sort of vying for, right?
It wasn't the dumbest war. It was the dumbest war. It was dumb. It was like a war kind of for nothing. Everyone just like wanted to like prove they were the best. And then it was also the worst war. Like if you asked me, like you had to fight in a war in history, like the bottom of the list would be World War I. It's just like it would be the worst one. Yeah.
Why is that?
It's like you have the like the weapons have gotten really modern, but the strategy hasn't. So you have like old school military commanders who are from like the Franco-Prussian War who are like, let's march across a field. But then you have like machine guns. Yeah. And so it's just the worst. So like the whole solution is like to dig a hole in the dirt and just stay there for 4 years. So it's like, ooh, it's bad.
And something tells me that wasn't planned when they all got together and said, we're going to go to war. They didn't think
No. What's funny about that,
somebody forgot shovels.
Yeah, they were, it was, at first it was a little bit, just out of necessity. But And yeah, it was like that's what's so funny about those is like you look at all the documents of all the different groups of that are like, sure, we'll hop into this war, and all of them are like, we'll be home by Christmas. So it was like everyone just was like, this will be fun, and then we'll get some colonies, and then it's like 4 years later, and they have like trench foot and rafts and stuff. Yeah.
And then, if I can ask you real quick, how did they sell the war to the average person? I mean, were there different?
Like super harmful nationalistic propaganda.
Okay.
Like really bad. Like in term like propaganda that will lead to World War II type stuff. So that's where like the Uncle Sam I Want You posters from. It's from World War One.
World War One, okay.
Yeah, a lot of people it's like that was for that. They also just like suppressed what people could talk about. So like you just couldn't, like in the United States it was illegal to like criticize the war. You could just get thrown in prison.
Right.
That's one of the reasons why, like,
on that.
What'd you say?
I watched a YouTube video on that.
Oh yeah, there you go.
I wish I could say that I read a book about it, but it was a YouTube video.
That's how. No, that's me too. I told you before I haven't read a book in years. So
yeah.
But just like really bad nationalism, and so then afterwards, the winning side was like, I think Germany's evil, so let's just like make sure they can never do anything again. And it's like, oh god, this is gonna end poorly.
Was that the Treaty of Versailles? Because you made that TikTok with the.
Yeah, that's the Treaty of Versailles. Where they didn't even invite Germany to the table. They just like, I think Germany just finished paying off their payments, like their reparations for World War One in like 2013. Like it was so bad, and so it's like, it was like it's like a direct line from that treaty to World War II. So not great.
I'm just imagining like a radio broadcast being like, "We need you, soldier. Austria-Hungary's evil. They're the devil." And everyone's like, "Let's go!"
Yeah,
Let's
totally.
fuck 'em up.
There's my favorite poster to show.
Curse here, by the way. Nobody's.
Oh, great. Okay. I always gotta be careful as a teacher. You gotta be careful. But, my favorite poster to show kids is there's like an American poster that's like the Hun is like coming this way, and it's like a German soldier, but looks like a monster and he has blood on his mouth and he's like crawling over Europe. And I'm like, yeah, so it was totally just like, those people are evil and you should just murder as many of them as possible. It was not great. Not great.
Yeah. I think about that stuff a lot. I mean, we can come back to that in a second, but I do want to ask you real quick about, what was the Taiping Rebellion? And let me preface this real quick, because we always like, when you study history, you always hear about, rebellions and wars and stuff. And I'm sure there's different, but they never really tell you why someone would pick up a gun and leave their family and, risk their life.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's one of those that, like, when you scratch the surface, and it's like the economy, when you really start thinking about it, you're like, this is all meaningless. This is all very strange. So I like the Taiping Rebellion because at least it has a great backstory. It has a great origin story. So, and the reason, I guess, like going back to our like history dude conversation, right? Like, to me, if you've read 10 books about the American Civil War, then I'd be like, great, pick up one book about the Taiping Rebellion, which was happening at the same time. It was like a civil war in China, right? Okay. So, there was, okay. I'm going to try to give the short version of this. There's a guy, he's going to change his name, but he's going to be known as Hong Xiuquan. He is really smart. He's from a village, so like the whole village pools their money to get him to go to school and study, because China has a system where like you can go from like a peasant to like advising the emperor if you pass these exams. It's like these, super rigid, super hard Confucian civil service exams. And like I think it's like 1% of the people who take it pass. And so they like pool all their money. He takes it.
I just want to say, my mom always says, as a baby, I was very intelligent.
So there you go. If the whole village,
like China, I wouldn't be a fucking podcaster.
If the whole village had pooled their money and gotten you a private tutor,
I guess I wasn't that smart. All right.
But yeah, it's like so he failed the test 1, 2, 3 times. The third time he had a nervous breakdown because of all the pressure, and on this nervous breakdown, he believed that he'd traveled to heaven and he met God. Or he met a man in heaven and who had a son in heaven and was like, you are also our son and it's your job to bring China to the light. And in the background,
I feel like God's probably a woman, right?
Not in 19th century China, but yes, totally.
Well, he wasn't perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, we can cancel him later for not saying. But so then in this vision, he also claimed he saw them like beating Confucius in the background for like leading China astray. But by the way, China's been Confucian for like I don't know, 2,000 years. It's like its longest tradition. And so he comes back down.
I don't think we're gonna be probably short on time because I want to know. Can you sum up Confucianism quickly?
Yeah, it's like an ethical philosophy, and it's just like Confucius was a thinker that was like, hey, the world would be more stable if everyone just treated each other with respect, and if everyone knew their place. So in every relationship, like you're a superior, you're an inferior. If you're an inferior, you obey. If you're superior, you respect.
Okay,
that's it. And women just get away, go in the home. That's Confucianism, basically.
Okay. I don't like that. I'm glad he was getting beaten up in that guy's jail.
I mean, it's better than others, but it's problematic. So anyway, he comes back down, he forgets about this vision. He's like, that was crazy. He studies again, he fails again. And at that point, he meets a Christian missionary and he learns more about Christianity. He's like, oh my gosh, like it was God and Jesus that I saw. I'm Jesus's younger brother. And it's my job to bring China to the light.
That's cool.
And so he has them forge like an 8-foot or 9-foot sword, and he's like, let's do it. And so he gets this group behind him of like followers.
Okay, guys, how about 6-foot sword? Sorry. Can we short?
I can't remember what it was in. It was in meters, but it was like it was like kind of silly. Like, okay, we get it, right? But so he like gets this following, and he conquers.
I'm just gonna Google image search him just so I have a visual. Hong Shu Quan. H-U.
H-O-N-G, and then Xiuquan.
Xiu. Okay, got it.
Hong Shu Quan. Okay. His Wikipedia page is an emotional roller coaster. It's a wild ride.
Okay.
But and he like builds up this like
he's hot
kingdom of the heavenly something, and he like fights the Qing for like 10 years, and it's the bloodiest civil war of all time. There's estimates that up to 70 million people died in this civil war. Like it's insane. And it's just like this guy that was like, I think I need to overthrow this dynasty and make China this like Christian, whatever society. And it failed, and like millions of people died.
And who were his followers in that rebellion?
So this is what's really interesting is like, he was from this ethnic minority, the Hakkas, that were like really discriminated against. And so he most historians are like, he genuinely believed, like Joan of Arc, right? Like he believed he was like, this was his mission. But, you don't get like tens of millions of people dying because some dude says he's Jesus' younger brother normally. And so it's also, there's just like these other groups that just don't like the government. So it kind of just becomes...
Kind of looks like a young Steven Seagal, don't you think?
A young Steven Seagal? Hong Shu Quan? Now I'm going to look him up.
Well, he looks a little more Caucasian than just from the pictures I'm looking at.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I mean, it's always hard to tell with these because they're always like illustrations, and sometimes they're like done way after the fact, and it's like, it's always hard to tell what they look like. But so I mean, at what point he had a kingdom that he ruled like 30 million people, and like he forced all the men to fight. And they eventually the government, the Qing dynasty, is able to put it down, but basically it's kind of one of the things that leads to them collapsing, and it leads to like China, not having an emperor anymore. It's like this is one of the events that just leads to this fall of this system that's existed in China for like 4,000 years. It's crazy.
That is crazy, and it's funny to look at history that way and to think about sort of the failure, the movements that have happened, and movements that don't come to fruition, so I guess it really is like a long road when you think about it.
It is interesting. I tell my students all the time, I'm like, we're from the future, so we get to like kind of know that, because for example, this guy then really inspired like the nationalist leaders who are going to try to set up a democracy, but then he also inspires like Mao Zedong really likes this guy because he was all about like the peasants and the people. So it's interesting because this was like, from his perspective, an abject failure. I think when he died, once the Qing conquered his kingdom, they like dug up his body and like beheaded his dead body and like burned like it ended really poorly for him. But it's like it is this sort of like I don't know.
That was probably one guy being like, let's dig up the dead body, and they were like, are you sure?
I have an idea.
Yes.
This will be really funny. Yeah.
So now chop the head off. Like, we already dug up the dead body.
Yeah, and it's totally just a few dudes being like, this will be hilarious. And if they had cameras, they would take photos of it. So.
Sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, I think that's more interesting than the American Civil War, but that's just me.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is too. I mean, I'm hearing this all for the first time, so I'm gonna have to read about it. It's a lot to kind of like take in all at once. There was other stuff I want to say. You know, I was looking at a picture of this guy, and I was trying to be like, what does the modern version of him look like? You know, because he's got like a cool hat, he's got like fire in his eyes.
Yeah.
You know, he kind of looks like a DJ. But I wanted to make a joke that was more.
I mean, he definitely looks very charismatic, right? I mean, it takes a lot to convince 30 million people you're Jesus' younger brother, 2,000 years later. So
yeah,
it's pretty impressive.
I know. I've tried.
Tell me about it. Tale as old as time.
Yeah. All right, cool. So let's. Okay. Do you want to do ancient Persia? Or you want to talk about the Civil War since you mentioned the Civil War?
So whatever you want to talk about. What questions do you have?
All right, let's go into Civil War because I feel like a lot of my listeners are probably, those kinds of guys. But I've talked about this a lot, how like when I was 15, I almost became a Civil War reenactor.
Yes.
Now we're probably, I know we're probably both millennials. But AOL had these like communities, kind of like what Facebook is now. Whatever you were interested, you could find these like chat communities. So I found like a Civil War reenactors chat room, and I started asking questions, and this guy got back to me, and I would start chatting with this guy. His name was Alan, about Civil War reenacting.
Great.
Now, nothing bad ever happened to me, obviously, but I think probably.
Oh, I was in chat rooms. Yeah, I tell my kids that all the time. I'm like, I don't think they were creepy then. And they're like, maybe you just didn't know.
Yeah. It's funny to think that this guy was just because we would like chat about the Civil War and stuff.
How old were you?
Probably like 14, 15, like freshman year of high school. It was between 8th grade and freshman year of high school that I was like, this is my thing. This is awesome. Because you learn about the Civil War in 8th grade.
Yeah.
And so I think that summer I went to a Civil War reenactment with my grandfather. It was a lot of fun because it was just me and him. We went to the park. We saw the battle. My grandfather like doesn't really know. He actually just turned 94. He's a World War II vet. He doesn't really know a lot of things, but he's a good talker, and he's so he was just like trying to teach me stuff, but he didn't know. At one point he told me that artillery killed almost as many people as muskets, which I don't think is true. I think it's like probably killed more people. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
He was like, because he pointed out a big artillery gun. And he was like, and they say the only things that killed more guys than the musket. I was like, disease, right? And he was like, no, those big guns over there.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we're like walking through the camp, and we're walking through this. We're walking through the Confederate. We walked through both camps. It wasn't like he was like, no, don't go to the Union camp.
That'd be a red flag, but yeah.
What's that?
I said that'd be a red flag, but yeah.
But I'll tell you this: it did seem like the guys at the Confederate camp were having a little bit more fun. It was a little more lax. I think
that's true.
The dress code was a little more loose. It was like the public school.
Their uniforms were cooler. Their generals were better. I mean, like, yeah, I get it. Their generals were way better. Like all the military academies were in the South, so it was like you had all if they stuck with their states, which they did. It's like all the best military leaders were in the South, right? So it's like, yeah. Yeah,
and it's kind of funny because if you take the practice of slavery out of it, right? That practice of slavery that's very bad.
It's a huge thing to take out of it, but yes.
Right. It's a big stain. Yeah. But you remove that stain, and it's just these guys. I mean, how cool would that be if like you and your boys were just owning the federal government for years? You were just, with your little ragtag army, just embarrassing them.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's, but it's like, it wasn't it was, I guess, a ragtag army, but it was like, yeah, you had all the best leaders, you had all the best. So I totally get it. Like, I love learning about Civil War battles. I love learning about that kind of stuff. Like, I want to be really clear. Like, I'm not anti. Like, I love when I find people at a party and they're like, I'm really into this thing. I just take issue if people like when they talk about history,
Yeah.
they really just mean this one thing, and I'm like, no, you can be really into this
And there's
thing.
enough people who do that.
Yeah, like there's a lot of other things that are and I also do get a smaller subset of mostly dudes who will start to like quiz me. Like they find out I'm a historian and they start to quiz me, and I can tell that they're waiting to know something that I don't. And I'm like, well, yeah, you probably do know something about the Civil War I don't. I try to teach the whole world, you know. So that's the part that always is like, ugh.
Well, because I saw your video on the Taiping Rebellion, I was like, I hope I don't run into her in a dark alley someday, and I have to answer trivia questions. But
and then you invited me on your podcast.
Yeah, well, because I need you as an ally. I don't want you to be an enemy.
There you go. That's the thing is I know like a medium amount about a lot. And so it's like I do think there's a group of people that like to be like, I knew this fact that you didn't know. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. I think that's awesome. Like you know a ton about one thing. And like we need you. And then we also need people who like, you know, can dabble.
Yeah, but why do those people feel a need to be that way? I don't know.
Well, so this is where it's like this really, really, really small subset is like, and what I was sort of getting at in that video, and then I kind of addressed later too.
That you have a family, you have a life and a family and a TikTok channel, and you don't have time for their bullshit.
I mean, it's that, but it's also, you know, it's like I do think there's for the longest time like history was very male and very like it was just really like a one note thing. It was like you studied like presidents and you studied wars. And it was like anything else was seen as like frivolous.
Yeah.
And it, you know, it's changed, right? Like the last 50 years or so, it's like, no, maybe we should study like social movements and people and minorities and whatever. And that for a long time has been seen as like fluff. And so there is like, you know, the vast majority of people don't think this, but there's like a really small group. I'm going to just go ahead and say some of them might have been at the Capitol around January 6th. But like there's a really small group of people that get like offended if I am not like super into the Civil War and instead want to talk about like women's suffrage or something. And I don't know why, but it just, yeah, it's like a trigger for them.
Well, those people are all in jail right now for climbing on Nancy Pelosi's desk.
I was going to say, I was like, I think I know where most of them were about 2 months ago. But yeah, so it's like, you know, that's such a small minority. They're just very loud. And they do find me, especially now that I'm putting myself out there on social media more, they find me.
Well, that brings us to another point that I wanted to ask you about. And let me just wrap up the Civil War thing real quick, because we can come back to that. Maybe we'll come back to that if we have time.
I want to hear about 15-year-old you Civil War reenacting, but
yeah, I know. And I didn't get to do it. Like I didn't follow through with it, but the closest I got, I did find a unit, and I went because Alan's unit disbanded. And I was like, but what about us? You know, no, but but he referred me to like a different unit. So he referred me to the 12th Virginia. Now here's the thing though, but here's the story that I wanted to tell. There's a lot of, and you know this, there's a lot of propaganda surrounding the Civil War, this lost cause narrative that is a very, I think pervasive is the right word, narrative. So it's, a lot of people believe this stuff about the Confederacy, that the war wasn't really about slavery and that it was more about states' rights. Whenever people bring that up, you just go, well, the states' rights, what did they want the right to do so badly? You know? Which I didn't even think. I think I owned a guy on Facebook like that, which I didn't even think that was like a big own. But
no, it's the simplest way to respond. It's the simplest way to respond to that. I always tell, if they're like, the Civil War is about states' rights, I'm like, you're totally right, which throws them off. I'm like, you just haven't finished the sentence yet. You know, it's like it's about states' rights to own slaves. Like you're right, but it's about this specific thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and so my sister-in-law is also a history teacher, and I don't really know her that well, but she's like a very nice person. She's small. She's very nice, but
you mean like physically small?
She's just like I mean, I'm trying to describe her in a way. You know, her name's Caitlin. She's like a very polite.
Okay.
Nice.
Just like kind of quiet to her. Yeah.
Yeah. Why? What was I implying when I said she's small?
It was just a funny first way to describe her. You're just like, she's small. And I was like, how small?
Yeah, she's like, I don't know. Honey, can you get in here and describe your sister-in-law for me? No, she's petite. That's the word. She's petite and innocent, you know? Anyway, but my wife was on a group chat with her family, and somebody brought up the Robert E. Lee statue being taken down, and she got really upset. It was very funny because I've never seen Caitlin get mad like this, but she got like viscerally very mad.
Yeah.
She's like, "That's fucking bullshit." I'd never even heard her curse before.
Whoa.
But to each their, to each their own, whatever. But also at this reenactment that I went to with my grandfather, where he didn't know it like anything. He's very social, and we were talking to the different reenactors, and this one guy comes out of his tent, and he's like, "And just so you know," and he was an older guy. He was like, "Don't believe all that BS they teach in school about the Confederacy." And then we left, and I was like, "Poppy, what does that guy mean by BS about the Confederacy?" And he just goes, bullshit." The BS stands for bullshit.
You're like, thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So I never really like learned. Anyway, fast forward, I go to this reenactment in Virginia, Leesburg, Virginia. They reenacted the Battle of Bull Run. There were like 3,000 reenactors there. It was like 90 degrees outside. I mean, these guys are. The dedication is, you got to respect it.
It's intense. I know. Yeah, I know. I have a few like more distant family members who do it, and it's like it's their whole thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I was just thinking about my dad being like I wonder, because my dad drove me down to Virginia to go for the weekend, and we were looking for that guy Alan. We never found him. He probably found another kid that he became friends with.
Or maybe he dodged a bullet. Maybe he was like a serial killer.
That's what who knows? But he seemed pretty normal. But that's what they all say. But it's just funny to think about like my dad being like, what did I do as a father? Like my son is like an overweight Confederate Civil War reenactor. But
oh, that's awesome.
What are you gonna do? Anyway, we went to their Christmas party. I never ended up joining. I kind of like fell through. I remember though telling my dad that he could just, because he wanted me to play golf at that point. Mm-hmm. I remember being like, well, golf clubs are like $500, but so is a musket. So wouldn't you rather me have a musket?
He's like, I don't know. I don't know, son.
Yeah.
Oh man.
So I think that's all I had to say about the Civil War. Did we miss anything?
Well, and you're welcome if you think this is unnecessary, whatever. I feel it's my teacherly duty to make sure we're clear, right? That like, you saying like the whole lost cause myth and stuff, that like what's really interesting about that, and then I'll just sort of leave it, is like, one, Robert E. Lee is on record. He was asked about whether we should start putting up monuments to the Civil War, and he said no. He was like, please don't do that. He's like, we need to move on. Like, please don't put up monuments to the Civil War, Robert E. Lee. So there's that. But then it's like, if you actually really look at it, no one was debating what the Civil War was about, and no one was like, making these big statues until like the 1910s and 20s and 30s, right? So it's like, when you look at and anytime there was a spike in like civil rights activity, or there was a spike in like black people like moving to new parts of the country, then you see the spike in the monuments. So, to me, I'm a little torn on the statue thing, because as a historian, I'm like, yeah, I don't think we should just like, tear them all down and destroy them. But I'm like, I do think the context is important, right? So like, whether that's like you're going to put it in then a museum where you can like really understand it, or you're going to make sure you have something there that's like, hey, okay, this is for this Confederate guy, but it was put up in 1959. Let's talk about why. Like, I just think it's just funny to me. Amongst historians, it's just really, it makes no sense why we're still debating what the Civil War was about, because you can just go look at the documents. You just go look at their declarations, and they say it. So it's like, it's just a weird thing. I have a hard time debating with people, because I just show it to them, and I'm like, I don't know what more you want.
Right, like it shouldn't really be a debate at this point. I mean, we should have kind of like, you'd think that we would have fully moved on.
Well, and there was a lost opportunity, right? There was like 10 years of like Reconstruction where the federal government was like, all right, we're going to really try to like help black people in the South, and we're going to really try to like overhaul this thing. And then we just got bored.
That was in the 20s or 30s or
no, this is like the 10 years after the Civil War. They like split up the South into military districts, Hunger Games style, and they were like, we're going to make sure black people can vote. And like, there was an opportunity, and then we just kind of got bored, and we were like, ugh.
Yeah.
We did it. Let's move on. So.
And then I guess Johnson oversaw that, right? So we actually did an episode on that. A couple, maybe like a year and a half.
Yeah, Johnson and then Grant. And it's like, they did some great things, but then it's like, as soon as they left, it was like, that's not long enough to like, undo 300 years of slavery. But they tried, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you got to really drive it into those people down there, the white Southerners. You know, you got to
Well, it
really.
takes like probably 3 generations. You know what I mean? Like it just
Mhm.
takes a long time. It's like if that's what you've grown up with, it totally makes sense. It like it just takes time.
Yeah, you got to steal more of their gold and kidnap more of their daughters, I guess. Uh,
Again,
yeah. So, oh, should we reenact the Taiping Rebellion? Should we start
do
like,
reenactments. If
yeah.
it, yeah, if that wasn't going to be like cultural appropriation, totally. Like if there was, I think that would actually be a really funny bit to like
That
go
would be
to a
the funniest
Civil
thing to
War
get canceled
reenactment.
for, I think. Yeah.
What'd you say?
That would be the funniest thing to get canceled for, being a Taiping Rebellion reenactor.
Yeah, and you know what would be funny is like, for like a comedian, right? Is like if you showed up to a Civil War reenactment, but you were like, "What do you mean? I thought we were talking about the Taiping Rebellion," and you have to then explain to people, they're like, "No, no, the Confederacy." You're like, "No, no, the Taipings," and like you act like they're all insane for thinking it was like the American Civil War. That'd be really funny.
You're like, why can't we just do this together? I'm in costume. Just pretend.
Civil War,
Let's just mix them together.
same time, 1860s, right? Yeah.
You guys are being gatekeepers right now.
Right, exactly. Now you're gatekeeping which Civil War I can be into and reenact, and yeah, totally.
Was it generally the same? I mean, in both those rebellions, was it generally the same weapons and the same,
That's something I don't know. It's interesting because like China invented gunpowder and then they were actually kind of late to the game.
Mhm.
So in terms of actually using it for guns, so that's something I actually don't really know anything about is like the weapons that were used and stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure the U.S. was more advanced because they were like industrialized at that point and stuff, but
Right.
China was like mostly still peasants.
Okay. Yeah, it'd be interesting to. I mean, I'm sure you could probably find that out. We could find that out easily. Someday I'll have a research assistant, like Joe Rogan has, and I'll just
That'd
have
be nice. That'd be
I'll have a
great.
guy standing by to research. But who cares? Um, all right. So I guess what I want to ask you now is that when you talk about the way we talk about the Civil War and you go like, oh yeah, you can just read the documents. It does feel like a lot of times, because believe it or not, I've read a lot of YouTube comments in my life. And it does feel like it's a pretty common tactic for history to be weaponized, whatever you're talking about. There's always ways to sort of present or sort of like absolve certain countries of their transgressions or to portray wars differently. So I guess how do you sort of like manage that? Do you ever have students who sort of buy into those narratives? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's hard. It's like, I think the Civil War is just the best example. I don't mean to keep like harping on that one, but it's just the best example of like, there's probably almost half the country who like disagrees with like why the war was fought, and that's a
Mhm.
big deal.
It's a lot.
Um, I mean, I think so. The thing I
Right, you
actually
don't see
really
a lot of like
into
Vietnam truthers or anything. Everybody kind of.
no, which there really should be. It kind of seems like that's more ripe for like, but yeah, there's not as many of those, and I think it's just because well, whatever. So, um, the thing I'm really into because I'm like an ultra history nerd
Mhm.
is historiography, which is like the history of history. So it's like you get real meta. It's like an Inception movie where you're like, I'm gonna study like how this thing has been taught over time.
Well, that's the show, everybody. Thanks for.
I know you're like I've lost everybody. But the point is that like at least as a teacher, right? Like you can say like, well, here I'm going to tell you like what I know that is factually true. I actually to go on to like a different topic so we don't just keep harping on this one thing.
Mhm.
I did teach at a place where I had a parent who denied the Holocaust and didn't
Hmm.
think it happened
Mm-hmm.
and wanted to meet with me and wanted to be like, how are you going to teach the like other viewpoint? And I was
Yeah.
like,
Now, when you have a parent who denies the Holocaust, where do you meet, and did they offer to did they offer to like buy you dinner or something like?
yeah, it was my first year teaching. I was 21 and I was
Uh-huh.
very professional, and then that parent left and I cried. I just was like, I was not prepared for this.
Oh.
It was just because it was so overwhelming. He was very nice about it. It just was so
Mhm.
shocking to me to be like, "Oh, I didn't know this. I'd never like talked to a person who was like that devout about like, yeah, no, it's just we all know it's like
Yeah.
it was faked." And I just was like, "Oh my gosh,
And it's tough. Yeah, it's tough when they're polite, because when they're not polite, you can just be like, well,
you're
you
being an
just kind of
asshole."
write them
Yeah.
off. My wife's uncle, I sorry to interrupt you, but my
No,
wife's
no, no.
uncle is a lot like this. And he's like a nut, I mean, he's insane, but he's very well thought out. He has a lot of arguments, but based on what he believes. He doesn't believe in evolution. And you sit down and you talk to him about this stuff, and he goes, all right, so you believe in evolution, right? He's like, so how about the eye? What do you think evolved first, the optic nerve or the cornea or the retina? What do you think? How do you think that happened? You telling me these organisms couldn't see and all of a sudden they could see? And then he kind of puts you in a position where you're like, yeah, I guess God did create the world. And
well, yeah, it's like there are certain things that you've just never had to explain to people because we trust, at least I trust people who have studied it more. So I'm just like, well, I don't know why, but that doesn't mean it's not true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think for me, the part of like addressing something like that was then really helpful.
Take us back to when this Holocaust denier parent came in. They want to meet with you. How
do they request the meeting? He doesn't tell me what, which is like,
okay.
Oh my God, it's like the worst feeling in the world when you're a teacher and a parent wants to meet and you're like, can you please tell me, are you going to tell me how great I am or that you think I should be fired? So, and he wants to meet, and then he sits down and he was like very polite about it. So it took me a really long time to figure out what he was saying. Like he was like, I know you're teaching about World War II right now. I think that's really great. My student really loves your class. I'm just wondering, there's a lot of different interpretations of, the Holocaust and what you're talking about. Like, I'm just curious how you're going to handle that. And I thought he meant like, are you going to explain? Because I do talk about like the roots of anti-Semitism and like, why did so many people do that? And like, I try to contextualize it. I thought he was talking about that. Mm-hmm. And then he kind of gave me like one of those smiles that I do feel like only young women get. That was just sort of like, no, I'm talking about like, there's a lot of evidence out there that those numbers are really exaggerated. And it was like halfway through the meeting before I realized what he was talking about. Mm-hmm. And so I just basically was like, well, I'm a historian. Like, I have to just go based on the artifacts and the facts that are there. And there's like actually insanely good records because they were really proud of what they were doing. And like, so that's what I'm going to teach based on that. And like, but you can talk to your kid at home about whatever other perspectives you want them to have. And, then they can decide on their own. And it was like very cordial.
You feel that way though. Why would you then if you actually believe that, why are you sending your kid to school with other kids?
Yeah, it was weird. And it was like, I do think, again, for context, this guy was this very kind man. Mm-hmm. He was a Palestinian guy who'd been like kicked out of his home. And so there is like, for him, I think it like made a lot of sense to be like, oh, this was all manufactured so that like they could take my land, right? That's sort of where it came from. So I tried to have some empathy for like, okay. I'm not empathizing with like what you're saying. I think it's really horrific, but like I do understand why. Like
I was picturing like a white guy with like a swastika tattoo on his head or something, just in your
totally. Office. It's like and it's weird because it's like these. There's a few different like far groups that all kind of come together in the back. It's very strange. But so I turned around and made every student do like a really in-depth research project on the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. So I did that and didn't get fired, thankfully. I was just like, you know what? We're actually going to spend 2 more weeks on this. I thought we were about done with this unit, but we're not. But, the way that I like to handle it with kids is I just try to present them with all the interpretations. So if we're talking about like the Civil War, I'll say, well, hey, here are the facts, here are the documents. But then I'll say, like, just so that here are some things other people will say. People will make this argument, people will make this argument. Ultimately, like, I'm here to teach you the history, so like, I'm going to show you the documents and whatever. Mm-hmm. But like, I want you to be aware of what you're going to hear other people say. And then it's like, some kids maybe do actually believe that thing, and they at least feel a little validated that I'm acknowledging that I hear that, but I'm very clearly being like, well, they say that, but like, here are the documents, you can decide, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's like a lot to take in. I mean, I didn't picture a Palestinian guy when you brought that up, first of all. But I guess my thing is, so if you think that the numbers are fabricated, because I'm sure a lot of people do, then how many Jews were killed? How many people were killed, and should we still teach it then? Because do you want me to think that it was only 500,000 or it was only 100,000? I mean, we
that's the thing. How do you quantify? How do you quantify like when we should care about it? And the number he said was like 6,000. And I was like, well, first of all, that's a big discrepancy. I was like, I don't do orders of magnitude, but that's like a big discrepancy. And then I was like, that's also a lot of people. Like that's also still really horrific. So it's one of those where, when you really break it down,
that's a Civil War reenactment full of people.
Yeah, that is still a significant amount of people, but yeah, it's just this whole weird thing, and we do get into this like people try to quantify their like tragedy and be like, well, I've experienced, and it's like, no, you can all it can all be in one level. It's all terrible,
Sure.
and like, right, yeah,
Sure. But it's funny because you see the Holocaust be weaponized all the time
uh-huh.
With, with Zionism or whatever it is. And
Yeah, on
whatever.
both sides. It's like it's
Yeah.
such a it's really sad. It's like the Civil War too. It's one of those events that like we really all should just rally on the one side. Like we really all should just be like, I kind of feel like this is a clear enough instance, whether it's like
Mhm.
slavery and the Civil War or whatever, where we could all just
Mhm.
as human beings be like,
Mhm.
yeah, we can all get on the same page about this one, and we still decide we just want to like use it. It's a bummer.
Yeah. Yeah. For our own,
For
yeah.
whatever we
Goals.
want. Yeah, for whatever we want. Yeah, people are the worst.
Yeah, they really are. Well, it's funny too when you look at, because you brought up an interesting point about how you're like, I just base on, right? Because none of us know anything, so we have to. There does have to be. I mean, I'm bringing it back to my wife's uncle, but there does have to be some kind of like trust in the information that you're getting. You do have to have sources that you trust, and then sometimes, there's people that I have, in my own family, whatever, that don't seem to have any information that they trust. So there's
Yeah.
not information that we can agree on.
Yeah.
So hopefully, because I asked my wife's uncle, I was like, so what do you read? And you go like, okay, this makes sense. And he's like, nothing. I question everything.
Right. And it's
So,
like that's an impossible. It's yeah. We've gotten. I was listening to another podcast of a woman who was talking about like we all talk about like the Enlightenment was really great and like this whole like individualism and like rational thought, and it's like maybe we've reached maybe we've reached the extreme where it's like, you know what, actually maybe it's not good that every single person can just like we've just reached this
express
weird
themselves.
extreme. What?
Express themselves.
Yeah, or not even express themselves, but just like yeah, we've gone so
There should be
far down
less
this path
podcasts, don't
of
you think?
yeah, of like individualism. It's like I've gotten to the point where I'm like, I don't know, maybe there are times when I just need I kind of want to be the parent that's like, it's because I said so. It's because I said so. Like I know I'm supposed to encourage kids to like question everything, but there are times when I'm like, no, we're not going to like question whether this thing happened.
Yeah.
Like we're not going to say like was George Washington the first president? We can debate about like was he a good president, but like
Right.
it gets you just lose all sense of reality if you like say, "Oh, I don't think he was the president." Like what do
Right.
you do?
Yeah. There has to be information that you agree on. I mean, it's tough. I was talking to my friend Ian today, and I had to. It was we had this conversation about economics and some social issues, and he just doesn't read anything, so he kept. And I guess I'm bringing my personal issues into the into the show.
That's okay.
But I guess the point I'm trying to make is it's hard when people don't have. It's hard when people aren't willing to sort of take the information and move forward with it. And
Mhm.
I guess the other side of that coin is you go like, well, I don't believe what I'm told and I question everything. But I don't know. At some point,
I think we've gotten to. I tell my kids this all the time. First of all, I never do debates in class because I'm like, we've had enough debates for a lifetime. Like, we don't need that. We can just have a discussion. We don't have to have a winner. It's fine.
right.
But the other thing I tell kids is I'm like, you're allowed to not have an opinion. Like,
Mhm.
you don't have to feel strongly about everything. It's okay. And I just tell them, I'm like, if you don't have an opinion or if you don't feel strongly, then your job is just to ask questions of the people who do.
Right.
And it's so funny, like kids
Of
in
the
this.
people who do. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, because it's
Not
like
everyone, you're not going to be passionate about every single thing.
you don't have to be. And I think we've gotten to this point where everyone is supposed to like declare everything. Like, well, how do you feel about this thing and this thing? And it's like, I don't know, there are a lot of issues where I'm like, I actually don't know how I feel about that thing. And I'll just kind of listen to the people who care and then kind of go with whichever one seems to make more sense.
Mhm.
But I think we've gotten to this point, especially with social media, like everyone has a megaphone and they feel like they need to always like make a statement on things. And that's really overwhelming. That's why there's so much stress and anxiety and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I guess I want to ask you again about just when you see history get weaponized, because there's certain times where, I don't know, sometimes somebody will bring up a point, right? And you'll see people on on like whatever it is and sometimes you just gotta kind of distance yourself from those people.
Yeah.
But you see people who I think sometimes you should be skeptical of when people have this sort of like negative worldview of the things that happen whenever there's limits placed on stuff, or whenever there's, for example, there was a Steven Crowder thing circulating where he said something about how like the Native Americans were, they engaged in barbaric practices and they were borderline evil or something like that. And so I think I think you kind of know whenever there's I don't know what I don't know. I mean, it's hard to articulate, but negativity. Whenever there's negativity cast on something, or an event, or a group of people, whatever. Even if it seems like something that's benign, that should be kind of like investigated. There's this narrative that There's this narrative that African slaves were sold by other African tribes.
Yeah,
I'm sure there's probably some.
That's true.
Right.
But it's like, and it's like, it was, but it's more complicated than that, It's
more complicated and that shouldn't be the answer to these sort of like complex issues. So you have to kind of know when something,
Yeah, my thing is always just like context. It's like, you just got to know the context. So I had a grandma of a student became my first troll. I had my first internet troll on my website, and I realized that it was a grandmother of one of my students, because I started kind of joking about it in class, and one of my students was like, "Oh my God, I know exactly, that's my grandma. I'm so sorry." And she kept commenting on, because I have a podcast too, and like my episode on.
You only have one troll though for all the.
Just one.
Yeah.
Just one that was when
17,000 TikTok followers and one troll. I mean, that's really good.
Well, now I have more, but
I have a list of trolls in my basement that I have to.
It's like your Arya Stark list. You're like, this was like a while ago, and they were very dedicated. They were checking every time I posted something, and then they would have like paragraphs of responses. I ended up just turning off comments on my post. So on one of my episodes, I was talking about the
platform was this?
This is just on my website. So it was like on my website where I post like the transcript to my podcast, and so, which is called Anti-Social Slaves, by the way. But and she just kept saying, like, I was talking about the slave trade and how it was like bigger in magnitude and bigger in like evil than slavery had been before. And then she just kept pulling up like, well, who was trading those slaves? Africans were, and Muslims had been buying and selling Africans for centuries. And it was like, yes, you're right, but like, does that make this other thing not true? Like, it's just, and it's just always more complicated. So I agree. I think it's hard when people just want to like say something was entirely good or entirely bad. It's like, that's never true. That can't be true.
Right. I think you do have to look out for any kind of oversimplification or reductionism. Or
I also really struggle too, and I struggle with this with my students because I love Gen Z. I really do. I think they're going to save us all, but
you do. That's interesting.
I really do think they're going to save us all. I'm with them every day. I think they are like, their whole philosophy is like, can we just like leave each other alone and just like.
I noticed it looks like you got a middle part on your in your head.
I do have a middle part. I'm trying to like, be a spy in Gen Z. I need them to trust me. So I've gotten some baggy jeans too. It's like I gotta look the part. But no, my one complaint, and I talk to my students about this all the time, is that Gen Z has a really hard time with problematic heroes, like problematic people, right? Where it's like, because I'll talk about George Washington, and I'll be like, I think he was the best president we've ever had historically, and I think we're really lucky we had him as our first president. And I'm like, we can talk about the fact that he owned slaves, and like there were tons of things he did that were terrible, but like let's also then talk about the things he did. And I have found that it's like you have on a lot of times the far right, you have people wanting to totally throw away like anything that's seen as like too liberal bias or that makes white people seem evil or whatever, which is that's bad. But you also on the far left have people that are like, if someone wasn't like pristine, right, then it's like you can't talk about them at all. And I've been trying to talk to my kids about that too. I'm like, Dr. King wasn't a perfect person. Like, no, that doesn't exist. So,
yeah, that's interesting. The standards are very high, and you see that with
really high.
Yeah.
You see with cancel culture, which I think it's over. Yeah, I think that phrase gets overused, but it's like. And I do think there's part of me that's like, you know what, we do probably have to swing this other way where there are a lot of people that probably shouldn't have had a platform a long time ago and like, great. But
Yeah.
it's like we got to be careful because I mean, if you're gonna like not listen to anyone that has ever had a problematic thing in their past, then you're not gonna have anyone. You're gonna be just like your uncle or whoever who's like,
Sure.
I don't trust anybody, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
it's hard.
Yeah, it's weird doing it. It's weird spending 15 years in comedy and then like knowing that you have, there's always stuff that gets dug up and just kind of knowing that
Oh, I'm sure.
said or tweeted or whatever that yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I sometimes I feel like I'm the only, but that must be a generational thing.
What is that? Just like
The purity stuff, the
yeah, and I think it's just because, like millennials, our generation, and then Gen Z have like more information than any generation has ever had. So
Sure.
we can do that, right? Like we can go and investigate and find out, like, was Harriet Tubman, like, did she have skeletons in her closet? It's like, I mean, no, by the way, not that I know of, but it's like, we sort of just have almost too much information. And it's what I always talk to kids about is I'm like, so then some of my kids will be like, okay, well, Robert E. Lee, like he fought for slavery, but he did other good things. And for me, I'm like, okay, well, it's just, what are we honoring them for, right? Are we honoring George Washington because he owned slaves? No, it's because of the things he did as president. But when we honor Robert E. Lee, it's because of the stuff he did in the war, right? So, and same with Dr. King. It's like, yeah, he had affairs, like he cheated on his wife. And it's like, but that's not why we honor him. Like we're honoring him for something else. So it's hard. It's like, and I think especially with
that would be really funny if they tried to cancel Martin Luther King for cheating on his wife.
Well, you know what? There's been like there have been people on at least the far right I've heard being like, oh, now your beloved Dr. King, there's new evidence that he had affairs, and it's like, oh, it's just I think that if we think anyone in history was perfect, then it's just setting ourselves up for a lot of disappointment.
For sure. I mean, I'm reading Malcolm X's autobiography right now, and there's whole chapters about about women that are a little,
Oh, he is so fascinating because there are things he'll say that you're like, oh my gosh, that applies today, and like is totally still this really relevant thing. And then you like will read something else and from a different era, and you're like, whoa, it's just With Malcolm X is one of those where anyone can find whatever they want from his own words, like whatever you want to prove.
Right, but I guess that's kind of the frustrating thing about this Gen Z sort of mindset is that it seems like they're holding, just from my perspective, it seems like they're holding people to kind of impossible standards. Because can you point to anybody and say this person didn't make any mistakes or?
Yeah, actually, I can. Can I point to her? It's Eleanor Roosevelt. I could talk about Eleanor Roosevelt for a long time. I will just say, this is not a challenge, but I have not found a reason to cancel her yet. And my students all know that the second that like Eleanor Roosevelt dirt comes out, I'm just gonna like quit my job and become a hermit. I'll be so sad. But no, I think you're totally right. And I think, it's always tricky because people are like, well, should we judge people from the past based on our own standards? And it's like, yes and no. Like, I think it's important to look back and say like slavery was wrong. And like, it's also important to know, like, people knew slavery was wrong in the time, too. Like, it's weird. It's weird to think that no one thought that this thing was bad. But, I also think it's important to be, culturally relative is, like, the academic term. Where you're like, okay, I studied the Aztecs in grad school. And so, like, I read a lot about, like, human sacrifice. And it was like, you got to contextualize it. I'm like, am I pro-human sacrifice? No. But, like, you also have to understand like why they were they weren't doing it just because they like wanted to murder people and stuff. I mean, there were like real reasons that they were doing it. They're flawed or whatever. But so I think you got to just have, I heard someone say that like the sign of intelligence is being able to like hold two thoughts in your brain at the same time, like two competing thoughts and know that they can both be true. And I think that's something we're really struggling with right now. We just want it to be like one or the other.
Yeah. People are babies.
People what?
They're babies.
Oh, I thought you said people have babies. I was like, no. Yes?
Well, that's all. Yeah. Did you know?
I know. I was like, well, I know, right? Yeah. It's really simplistic. It's easier. It's so much easier to be confident in your belief. Like, it's so much easier. I will say, as someone who is constantly trying to learn new things and like constantly trying to like better myself and whatever, it's exhausting. Like it really is ignorance is bliss. Like it really is so much easier to just be like, nope, I believe that the earth is flat and, we're all going to have planets. Like, that's so much easier. But
you don't think Eleanor Roosevelt ever, like, said the R word, maybe? Or
Oh, well, yeah, sure. I'm sure if she had Twitter, I'm sure we could find something. I just mean, in terms of you kind of go down the list of like what a lot of people in the past get criticized for of like race, gender,
yeah.
LGBTQ, and it's like, I mean, she was a queer woman, right? She fought for black rights. Like there's just a lot of stuff that it was like, yeah, she actually kind of holds up. I think she'd still be legit in 2021, which is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. That's something her and Martin Luther King had in common. They just loved
They both loved women.
yeah. Why was George Washington one of our best presidents?
Well, I guess what I mean is like I just think we're really lucky that he was our first president because I don't think we realize how like tenuous those first few years were. Like, and if you look at every other revolution at that time, like in France and Haiti and all these other places, they all devolve into like a dictatorship. And so that could have happened, and it's really only because George Washington was like, no, no, no. Like he like checked his own power like many times. And so like set a lot of precedents where I think if it had been, I think there are a lot of other people that if they had been the first one, they could have made themselves like a dictator. They could have made themselves king. Some people wanted George Washington to become a king, like a whatever. And he was like, no, no. And him stepping down after 2 terms, all of that I just think, and I think we also saw this with the last presidency, that like we saw that so much of our government is actually based on like social norms instead of laws. Like so much of our government is like, can he do that? And it's like, well, actually, technically he can, just no one ever has before.
And he just did. Yeah.
And he did, and I guess he can. And a lot of that goes back to like the first few presidents just setting that standard of like, well, this is just the way we do things. And so, yeah, he was super problematic in some ways, but I think the fact that he was our first one is like, we got really lucky because we could have had like Napoleon,
Right. In Assassin's Creed 3, there's actually an expansion pack where it's like a Revolutionary War game, and you play George Washington sort of becomes like a mad dictator. And you have to go to Mount Vernon and kill him.
That's blasphemy. Oh, I'd be so upset if my son started playing that.
Really?
Well, just because he was like the opposite. He actually like didn't want, he had to be begged to be president and stuff. But I'm not criticizing a video game I don't expect them to be perfectly historical.
Yeah. So he was like a humble leader is what you're saying.
Oh yeah, they had to beg him to become president. He was like, I just want to be on my plantation with my wife. And so again, I think that's why I think that he's the only president we've ever had that didn't want to be president. And I think that's a good thing. I kind of think we need, because if you really think about like the like sheer gall that it takes to be like, I should be the president of the United States.
Sure.
It's like, that's a certain type of person,
Right. Well, I mean, what's that quote? Like people who are good at grabbing power are the least suited to wield it, or the other way around.
Yeah, it's like you should go find like a teacher and be like, hey, we're gonna make you president for 4 years, and like because it's just So I think the fact that he's really, besides I don't know like Gerald Ford or something, but he's really the only president who like actively didn't want it, and I think that's really healthy. I think that's its own like check on a president's power is if they're like, oh, this isn't, I don't really care that much about this. I really just want to go home.
Right. Yeah. I think that's in my field too. There's a lot of people who just, within entertainment, there's just people who are just very confident.
Confidence.
And you're like, how does this, how did you get? There's also an expansion pack in Medal of Honor where FDR turns evil and his wheelchair has guns. And no, I'm just kidding.
I was like, that sounds awesome.
You have to fight half robot FDR.
He was a little like you can make the argument he was a little power hungry. So I'm actually I'd be okay if that was true, but that's
okay.
Fine.
But not George Washington.
What?
But not George. It's not acceptable for George Washington.
No, that's like the opposite. George's whole thing was that he was like, leave me alone. I'm old and I'm tired and I don't want to be president. Like he ran on it. Like he did not run. People just were like, you're going to be the president. And he was like, ugh. And then,
There's another expansion pack of, I forget the game, but JFK becomes mad with power and you have to travel to Dallas with a sniper rifle and stop him.
That's not true.
No, it's not true.
That's real life. It's too soon.
Yeah. But like evil, it's evil JFK that you're,
Oh, great. Yeah. JFK also loved women. There's a theme.
There is a theme throughout history,
Men who really love women tend to become very powerful, or men who become powerful tend to then like women. I don't know.
Yeah, it's almost like, I think it was the great Tony Montana from Scarface who said, All right. So before we wrap up,
Yeah.
I guess because I wanted to talk, I wanted to kind of start the episode out with this. But you're a teacher. What do you do when you see a student like in the mall or something outside of school? Is it as weird for you as it was for us?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and it's weird. I'm actually now at this school. I'm actually now at like a really tiny little like private high school that is like kind of this little teacher utopia. So I actually
Mhm.
like feel like I really know my kids well, and
Mhm.
so if I did see them, I'd be like it'd be fine. But no, when I was teaching like 180 kids every day and whatever, and like I live in the neighborhood where I've always taught.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's just awkward. Like you don't think about stuff. Like I'm in Austin, and so we have like Austin City Limits, right? This big music festival, and I stopped going. Like 2 years into teaching high school, I just stopped going. I was like, it's not fun anymore because I
Mhm.
would be there. I'm of age. I want to like drink and
Mhm.
have fun and be hanging out with my friends. And then I would see like a gaggle of my high school students and be like, oh God, like this is. And sometimes I'd see them and be like, I'm pretty sure they're participating in some potentially illegal activities, but I'm like,
Yeah.
is this my job? I'm off the
Yeah. What
clock.
do you do? Do you narc or do you let it go?
I've never had to like it's never been obvious enough. I will say like if I saw a kid like breaking the law, like,
Mhm.
lighting up a joint or something,
Mhm.
I think I would shoot an email to someone and let them handle it. But there's just been a few times where kids would come up to me and be like, Miss J, and they were like a little too enthusiastic to see me. And
Mhm.
I was like, it kind of feels like maybe you're in an extra good mood today. But
Right.
so my response was I just started only going to South by Southwest because they ID you at all the parties at South by. You have to be 21. So I was like, this will be my solution.
Nice.
And now I have students who are like 28, like former students who are 28
Right.
because
Right.
I
Right.
started so young. So there's no escaping. But yeah, it's weird.
Yeah. I think the biggest window that you got into teachers, their personal lives was just the car that they drove, like they'd
Yeah.
have like, have like a Ford
You're like,
Taurus.
really? They have a Jeep? Yeah, it was like, yeah, there'd be these strange things. And
Yeah.
now with Zoom, now teaching on Zoom, like kids are like in my house. Kids like I'll be teaching
No
and
good. No good.
yeah, they'll like see my kid run by half naked in the background and I'm like the veil is lifted. Like there's no. Actually, I have a funny story about that, which is that
I would make them
my
sign an NDA. Be like, do not tell anybody what my furniture, what kind of furniture I have.
um my funny story about that is that I let around the winter break, this just last winter break, my husband was really excited about frying a turkey. So we were
Mhm.
like, you got us up to fry a turkey, and we had like three
Did
of
it
our friends
outside?
over. Hmm?
He did it outside.
He's gonna do it outside. That's key to the story. It's
Right.
key to the story because he does it in
I
the front
smoked
yard.
mine. I smoked mine this year and the year before, and it's like really, really not. I don't know if you guys have a smoker.
I think he's done that before. He smoked a brisket because we're in Texas. But he really wanted to fry a turkey. He found some recipe that he really wanted to try. And so it's critical to the story that he chose to fry the turkey in the front yard because he didn't want our dog running around in the backyard. He was like, I don't want it to splatter or whatever.
Sure.
So he's in the front yard. We had like three other friends. We're gonna do like a backyard sort of thing. So my husband and one of his best friends had decided growing a mullet would be funny during quarantine. So they both have mullets. They're both drinking beer, frying a turkey in the front yard. And that's the day that a student of mine decided to drop off like a Christmas gift.
Awesome.
So she's, like 16-year old like walking up to my house because the school asked like, can we give your address to people who want to send you gifts? And I was like, hell yeah. I didn't think people would like stop by. And so yeah, she walked
Yeah,
up and
why
was
would
like,
she do that? That's so
she was
invasive.
going around delivering presents. She was really. This is the thing. I'm at this really small, weird school where like they call me Emily. Like it's this kind of hippie school where everyone's just like. It really is this cool community. Like I had a parent drop off like a 6-pack of my favorite beer as a thank you. Like it's really great.
What's your
But
favorite beer?
it was just bad timing.
What's your
It was just
favorite
bad
beer?
timing.
What's your favorite beer?
Oh, it's from a local place called Pint House Pizza in Austin.
Okay.
Pint House Pizza. If you're in Austin, it's called Electric Jellyfish. It's the best. But yeah. So she walks up and she sees my husband. Thank God he had a shirt on. I think he only had a shirt on because he was frying something, like with a mullet, drinking beer, frying a turkey. And she was like, give this to Emily, I guess. I just like on Monday at school, I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw the band teacher at the mall one time.
Mm.
I also had, when I was in high school, there was a problem with my schedule. I had to take B-level history. And I'm like pretty, I'm like moderately intelligent. So it was weird for me to be in which I don't know if they do this in public
What's
school
B
now, but
level?
Well, they would break down the classes by like how smart the kids were, I guess. It was just taught at different levels, and there was GT English, gifted and talented.
Mhm.
Not to toot my own horn, but I was in that.
Me too.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there was A level, B level, and C level.
Oh.
Yeah, which is kind of, I don't know. I guess that's a whole different story.
Yeah, that seems really harmful.
Yeah.
To be labeled like you're this. It's
Yeah.
like being like the bluebirds or the redbirds. It's like we all know.
Right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Sea Level History. I guess, I don't know, if you want to keep your head down, just be quiet. Just,
Yeah, you'll need this to get your GED, whatever. It's fine.
Here's some matches if you want to play with them.
Yeah. Oh, God.
But I had to take B-level history, and I had this teacher, Miss Petrilla, and she came in, and she was like covering up her mouth when she was talking, and we were like, kids were like, why are you doing that? And she had braces. She was trying to hide.
That sucks.
Braces, yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, you gotta have an unhealthy. I think it's the same for being a stand-up. Like you have to have a little bit of an unhealthy dose of confidence to be a high school teacher. Like
Sure.
where you have to walk in being like, this is gonna be awesome, because then you know you're gonna get taken down a few levels, and like you want to walk out of the building being like, that was fine. Like, yeah. If you start too low, it's like, oh, it's gonna get bad.
That's crazy to think about, just a group of high school kids that have, they don't have, no high school kid would ever find out where I lived. I would be very careful about keeping that a secret, but they know what you look like. I mean, they know, like,
they follow me on TikTok. They're my target audience. And they're my coworkers. That's what I tell them all the time. I'm like, y'all, you think I don't get to see the other adults in the building. I spend all day with y'all. You know what I mean? Like, you're my coworkers. It's a bunch of 16-year-olds. Luckily, I think they're hilarious, and I think they're actually great. But it's like, I think it's funny. Like, I actually started doing like improv comedy like a year or two ago, and I realized I was like totally unafraid, and everyone else in my level 1 was, and I was like, oh, I realized like I've basically been doing this for 10 years, just like. This is going to go badly. I'm probably going to embarrass myself, but let's just do it.
Well, if any of those kids are mean to you, I will have my listeners do targeted harassment towards them.
Perfect. That's exactly the message.
We'll shut them
up. When
in
doubt, just harass, young people online.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I guess the last thing I would say is, because I do think about my experience in school and just with teachers and stuff, and I think sometimes I do kind of have, I think when you get to my age, you start thinking about all the decisions that you made when you were young in your 20s. I spent a lot of my 20s, running around doing spots in the city, doing shows, going to open mics, trying to sort of establish some kind of career in comedy. So sometimes I think of like, alternate lives that I could have had.
Yeah.
But sometimes I do imagine myself as like a cool history teacher that everybody likes.
It's a great job.
I probably do the finger guns a lot to kids in the hall.
You like turn the chair around and sit backward.
I turn the chair around. I don't rap because I was lectured by the school board. I'm not allowed to rap.
Right. Yeah. But then Hamilton comes out and you're like, here I am. I can do it again.
This is bullshit. So he's allowed to do it, but not me. And then there's an older teacher who's like in his 70s who also raps, and he quits over it because he's been like, I've been rapping for 30 years.
I have my transparencies with my raps on them.
God damn it, this politically correct bullshit. And then he becomes a right winger. He starts a right wing, he gets pushed out by the liberal agenda. But I feel like my thing is, if I was a teacher, I would just be like, I would start every lesson. You tell me if this is a good idea. I would also be dating like the hottest teacher in school,
Right.
Mm-hmm. And it would be like,
and you make sure all the kids knew about it.
I make sure I'd be like, hey, that's enough. That's a personal question. Don't disrespect my girl. I mean, Miss Miss Jacobs. Don't talk about her that way. But I feel like I would start every lesson by being like, why do we care about this stuff? Because that's never really taught. Like, why do we care? Why do we care about imperialism or any kind of, or government, or, so that's
totally. I mean, that's the whole point. That's like, it's like, there are so many kids.
They never mention that. They never bring that up.
You should come to my class because I do. Yeah. But I mean, you're totally right. It's like kids are like, why do I need to know this? And my most extreme.
Can anybody be like a guest lecturer in one of your classes? Because if I'm ever down there, Yeah.
Well, with Zoom, you could zoom into my class tomorrow, but I don't.
Yeah.
I'd have to preview your lesson first, but
Got it.
no, I mean, yeah, I talk about that all the time. Like we'll be talking about
I'll just
something,
come in
and
as
then
FDR. I'll be like, hello, everybody.
he didn't tell me he was gonna do this. I didn't know this. I didn't know about this part, kids.
No, we talked about it beforehand. She actually co-wrote this segment that I'm about.
Yeah, but no, it's like that's the whole point. I mean, unless you want to go be an actual historian and just study for the sake of history, like if you're just a regular person, like yeah, that question of like why do I care about this is like really important. And I'm with you. It's like sad that more people don't address it and that we don't
Every
think about
lesson
it. I'm like,
start. Yeah.
yeah, it's like, do I need to teach this? There are so many things I skip where I'm just like, you know what? I actually
Really?
don't think they need to know this. Like, let's just move on, right?
You're allowed to do that.
I am at my school because I don't have to, follow. I'm at a private school now, so I don't have to follow the state standards. I'll be honest, I did it before anyway. Most teachers in Texas, I don't think really follow those because they're, especially in history, they're real, they're real dicey. But
okay, interesting. Well, I guess that's about it. I mean, I guess we kind of covered everything. I thought we were going to talk about ancient Persia a little bit. I actually read a bit about ancient Persia.
Oh, cool.
But we'll definitely have you back on if you can come back on the show.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I'll totally come back on to talk about Persia and how they're better than Rome. Fighting words. Those are going to be my fighting words that I'll leave you with.
I was actually thinking about, because my family's Italian, and so I had an uncle who was like, and he was like right off the boat. He's my great uncle, but he would always like go on about how great ancient Rome was. He's like, the Romans, he talked with like a very heavy accent.
Uh-huh.
He was like, the Romans were like, they were great. They did everything. They invented bagpipes. So I was thinking, what about a guy who's like really proud of being Italian? He thinks that the Romans invented gay sex. He was like, people think it was the Greeks, but it was actually the Romans.
It's like everything they ever did, even if it's terrible. They invented burning a city down. They invented that. Yeah.
Right. That's how proud to be Italian he is.
That's awesome.
Wait, but so ancient Persia, I read. Are there any key pieces that we can?
Okay, here's my like elevator pitch. My elevator pitch is that everything that Rome gets credit for doing, they copied from either the Greeks or more the Persians. It's just everything. Like the Persians were the road builders. The Persians were the first people to make coins. The Persians were the first people to divide up their empire, and the Persians were super tolerant, which the Romans weren't. So they're just great.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I guess that's it. What do you want to plug?
Just come check out. I'm on like TikTok and Instagram and YouTube. And then I also have a podcast, and it's all called Antisocial Studies. So really, like, my target audience is actually non-students. So like the stuff I make is mostly for people who are like out of school and just are like, I don't remember anything, or I had a terrible history teacher or whatever. So like my podcast is all about explaining history to like adults, of like why you need to know it and what you should know and that sort of thing. So if you feel like they're like,
listeners are working on their GED right now. So
it's what?
Most of my listeners they either have a GED or they're working on it.
Well, it'll probably help with that. So it's like, I just think it's meant to be, it's like entertaining, it's funny. I make a lot of like pop culture references. It's more for just people who feel like they have big gaps in their knowledge, where they're like, I really should know more about Rome, but I don't. So Antisocial Studies. You can just find me kind of wherever.
That's cool. Yeah, I was talking to my friend Ian today, and your TikTok channel is really good because the videos are very digestible, and they make you want to read more or learn more about the stuff. So it's a nice little introduction to
Awesome.
these bigger things. So
That's great. Thanks.
Keep turning those out. I'm gonna send one to my friend Ian that I was talking to today.
Perfect.
Hopefully, because I was like, you got to read more. Anyway, yeah. So thanks so much. You guys know the drill. Support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/sitdownpod, where you get a show every single day. Follow us. Follow me, Mike Racine, on Twitter and Instagram. I'm gonna stop recording, but stay on the line just so we can wrap up. And that was Emily. Everybody, Emily, Glakeler.
It's aggressively German. Yeah.
Yeah, there's too many L. Just some feedback. There's too many L's in that name.
I agree.
Glankler.
Emily Glankler.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.